President Trump is heading back to the United States this afternoon after attending the NATO summit in The Hague, Netherlands. The president is praising NATO leaders after they agreed to his demand that they significantly increase their military spending. While the meetings have largely focused on defense spending and the war in Ukraine, the U.S.-Israel-Iran conflict has overshadowed much of those discussions. President Trump is insisting U.S. strikes destroyed Iran's nuclear operation, despite a U.S. intelligence report that says otherwise.
I will say that on a very confidential basis, they're looking at the reports, like numerous reports, and including people going to the site and checking the site. And they're going to be having, I guess you're going to be having over the next couple of days we're going to encapsulate it. But no, the site was obliterated, just like I said it was.
The president spent much of his time strongly disputing an early intelligence assessment from the Pentagon. It suggested those U.S. strikes may have only delayed Iran's nuclear program by a few months. And what you're looking at here, these are satellite images showing what the sites look like before and then after those strikes. Now, we should note there is no way of verifying these assessments independently. CBS News polling finds that while the U.S. strikes on Iran are receiving backing from Republicans, 51% of those polled overall said they had little to no confidence in the Trump administration's handling of Iran. 44% said they are very concerned that the strikes could lead to a wider war. 35% are somewhat concerned. And more than half, 63% of those surveyed, said President Trump needs approval from Congress for military action against Iran. Senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is outside the Hague there. And Ed, very good to see you. Thanks for joining us. A lot to talk about there with Iran, but let's start with the purpose of the NATO meeting. Leaders there agreed to a massive increase in defense spending after pressure from the president, a big win for him. But what should we make of his comments earlier this week about the U.S.'s commitment to the alliance's key principle?
The idea being that an attack on one is an attack on all, and the Article 5 of the NATO Charter could be invoked if that happens. One of the things we picked up on this week when it comes to that question, Nancy, interestingly, is NATO leaders don't like to talk about, what kind of attack or incident qualifies as an Article 5 example, in part because they don't want to tip off enemies or potential attackers to what it would take to spark some kind of a response. And it seems, forgive me, at this point that with the president, perhaps that ambiguity is part of his strategy. Don't necessarily tip your hand to it. But he and NATO leadership this week made very clear, look, he's here. He got this huge spending commitment from all the member countries. They've appointed a new NATO Supreme Allied Commander that's an American officer. The United States is engaged. And as the Secretary General said during comments earlier today to reporters, stop worrying Europe that the United States is going to be involved in the alliance. It's here, it is, it will be, and it's continuing to do a lot of work with this alliance. If anything, he suggested, it's other European countries that should be asked whether they're going to meet these spending commitments and be equal partners at the table.
And Ed, there are plenty of conversations that are happening there. President Trump also had a meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky earlier today. What came of that?
Well, we expected that would involve a public look at their conversation, that reporters would be, but they were not. Zelensky posted some information on X earlier suggesting that they had another fulsome conversation regarding the ongoing war. He showed the president some battlefield developments to give him a sense of how exactly Russia is struggling to conduct the military operations. And he once again asked for more military equipment to continue his campaign to push back Russia. The president made clear he is considering surface-to-air missile-type batteries to assist Ukraine's ongoing efforts. Said he's not ruling out the possibility that they will get them, but he said, look, the United States needs them. We've given some to Israel. They need them right now in dealing with Iran, but didn't rule it out, and reiterated that he believes Vladimir Putin needs to stop his war in Ukraine, that ultimately is what ends the conflict. He has said that before, but for him to say it here at the NATO summit, at a place that is gravely concerned about Russia's ongoing military campaign, it's got to be music to the ears of a lot of members.
I can imagine. And Ed, while talking at that press conference earlier today, President Trump mentioned a meeting next week with Iran. And you also asked the president about the war being between Israel and Iran being over. So I'm going to ask you about that, but let's play it first.
Because I dealt with both, and they're both tired, exhausted, They fought very, very hard and very viciously, very violently, and they were both satisfied to go home and get out. And can it start again? I guess someday it can. It could maybe start soon. I think a big telltale sign was when, as you know, Iran somewhat, by not much, violated the ceasefire.
So what did you make of that, Ed? And are there any specifics on that meeting with Iran next week?
There aren't yet, but it is likely to involve Steve Witkoff, the president's Middle East envoy, who had been dealing with Iran, has been in touch with Iranian officials throughout this entire ordeal. He essentially had set that up by suggesting that with the mounting evidence suggesting this wasn't a complete and total annihilation of Iran's nuclear program, the fact that they got engaged at all is what's now driving Israel and Iran to back off each other and head towards peace. So he's essentially inferring, if I hadn't done this, we wouldn't be at a point where there is this ceasefire in place and the two aren't attacking each other. So it's an interesting spin on his decision to do this. And you saw there, he conceded, perhaps it will flare up again, but he doesn't expect it to flare up when he's president.
Plenty more to come. Ed O'Keefe, always very good to see you. Thanks, Ed. For more on the developments with Iran, we want to bring in now Brian Katulis. Brian is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Brian, thanks for joining us. What do you believe the U.S. should be striving for in these talks with Iran next week?
Well, clearly, we need to get an impact assessment on what damage was done to not just the nuclear program, but the ballistic missiles, which would be a delivery system for them. Second, we're likely going to have to work with interlocutors in the region because I think trust and confidence between Iran and America is probably below zero, right? The two countries were supposed to head into talks, a sixth round of talks in Muscat, Oman, 2 days after Israel began its strikes. So there's going to be a trust and confidence gap. And part of that, bridging that, will involve partners, America's partners in the region, to even just begin the discussion again. But we got to know what we're talking about. And you can't really have a discussion if you don't know what's left, what was damaged, what still remains. Is there still highly enriched uranium? Where is it? All of these things we need to actually set a new framework for.
Speaking of trust and confidence, do you see the ceasefire holding between Iran and Israel?
I think for now it will because both countries have an interest to do so. They also are hearing from other countries in the region who did not like the fact that some of these missiles went through their airspace. And I think there's an incentive to maintain it. But it could be very fragile, in part because Trump's diplomacy itself is quite erratic. And as we see from President Trump's statements, social media, sometimes media statements, he can actually upset things that are quite delicate. And I think that's part of the reason why he's not had a major diplomatic success in his 5 months in office so far.
Well, Brian, a lot has also been made of proxies and allies in all this. What do you see allies of Iran doing behind the scenes in the meantime?
I think right now they're holding their fire. The Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, they're down, but they're not out. So they're waiting to see what will happen next. And that's part of this network that Iran has developed literally for decades, a deadly network of terror groups that actually threaten the people of the region first, but have great potential to threaten not just Israel, but U.S. troops in the region. But they're holding their fire for now.
Brian Katulis, we appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you.